I started listening to vinyl on my own when I was about 10 years old, which is when I learned how to use the turntable. But my family has had a turntable my whole life, before we even had a TV. We had a lot of kids' music and European folk music on vinyl. The following albums are from multiple different people who bought vinyl back when it was the main or the only format available. And as you'll see, most of them are not in the greatest shape. Now, I'm not a big fan of vinyl. As a staunch necro warrior, I obviously prefer cassettes or pieces of clay with rough grooves in them. And I also don't believe vinyl sounds best. There are file types with minimal compression now, and you can also buy very good speakers. Obviously, I would never buy good speakers personally, so why do I own any vinyl at all? Well, I love the sleeve size, which makes art very visible, and I like the history as well. But I've only bought one vinyl record in my entire life. Everything else you'll see in this video has been lifted from older family members' collections. So, the first one here is Van Halen Fair Warning, which was released in 1981. According to Esquire, it's one of the 75 albums every man should own, which I've looked at that list. It's just a white male hipster in his late 30s to 60s starter pack. Number 2, I have also Saga, Worlds Apart. This was also released in 1981. Saga is a Canadian band. This is some groovy shit, I tell you what. This is Visage's self-titled album, which was released in 1980, and I listened to this album as soon as I figured out how to use the turntable because the cover art was so cool to me, and it's still one of my favorites. This is the only album here that I actually bought myself. It's Witchcraft, Magic, and Adventure in Demonology, which was released in 1971, and you may have been able to tell it's voiced by Vincent Price, who is, of course, one of the most famous voices from horror. And this vinyl is essentially an audiobook about witchcraft, although it is entirely for entertainment and not at all informative. It's also a little scratched. This next album is Quiet Riot, Metal Health, which was released in 1983. This was the first vinyl I ever owned in my own right. I found it in a pile of vinyls and dishes on the side of the road by my first apartment. I only learned 6 years later that Come On Feel the Noise was actually a huge hit and very famous. This is another Canadian band from Toronto this time called CoLlEcTiOn. The album is called Endangered Species and it was released in 1980. They're a band who seems really interesting for everything but their music. This is the only CoLlEcTiOn album I've ever heard though. They're also named after an alien. And of course, David Bowie's Let's Dance from 1983. It's pretty much impossible to raid a vinyl library collected between 1970 and 1990 without finding a few Bowie albums. This is Alice Cooper's Greatest Hits from 1974. I guess nobody wanted to commit to an actual Alice Cooper album. This is another Canadian band called Harmonium, and this is a self-titled album from 1974. This band's from Montreal, and the music is some seriously artsy folk rock bops. Next we have Bauhaus, the singles from 1981 to 1983. I'm a big fan of Bauhaus, and the art movement as well. Another Greatest Hits album, this time Nazareth's Greatest Hits. It was released in 1975. Amazing cover art, I love this. It's incredibly vivid. Thank God for the brief glory days of vinyl, when album art became everything. Another Nazareth album, this time The Full Circle, which was released in 1981. And this is Public Image Limited, Live in Tokyo, which was released in 1983. This was also one of my favorites as a kid, but I think it was just because I found the name Public Image Limited to be very cool and clever. And then of course, The Clash Sandinista, which was released in 1980. I don't really have much to say about this. If you don't know The Clash, I mean, Google exists. And here we have Duran Duran, Seven and the Ragged Tiger, which was released in 1983. Yeah, I admit it, I like Duran Duran. I really like the vocal style, I think it's really cool. I like the Union of the Snake from this album particularly. Have you ever seen the music video for that song? It's weird as fuck. I love it. AC/DC Highway to Hell 1979. What can I say? It's a classic, of course. Obviously I have this. Obviously I would steal this from anyone. Obviously people bought that out. Like, that was a popular album at the time. And so of course I would pull it out and keep it for myself. AC/DC again, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, 1976. It's an AC/DC album. So next I have Asia and their self-titled album from 1982. God, that cover art! It's amazing, it's so perfect. It's by Roger Dean, obviously. That man is a genius. And this is Duran Duran's Rio, 1982. Yet another striking album artwork. This album has my favorite Duran Duran song, The Chauffeur. This is I Brain Eater, I Hear Where You, from 1983. I Brain Eater is a Vancouver punk band that started out being called just Brain Eater, but now I think there's only one member, so they're called I Brain Eater. Of course, the heavy metal soundtrack from 1981. I mean, this is the epitome of the pre-thrash metal scene, if you can even call it that. Before Maiden and Metallica, this was it. I'm not even sure people were calling this music metal at the time. The name was just cool and sounded like cars and big dick shit. Obviously, I have the movie as well, and the second one they made in 2000, though not the soundtrack for that. Van Halen, 1978. This album speaks for itself. Public Images Limited, album, 1986. Another amazing cover art. I love this kind of impudent bullshit. Apparently, this started beef with punk band Flipper. Modern English, 1986. Stop Start. I'm actually not sure why I have this album. Of course, The Cure, Standing on a Beach, the singles compilation from 1986. This album has A Forest and Love Cats, which were my favorite songs from about when I was 12 to 15 years old, and Let's Go to Bed and Killing an Arab, which were my favorites from 15 to 20, and now I'm back onto my A Forest and also Boys Don't Cry bullshit. 1979 album, The Clash's London Calling. Duh, obviously I have this. I read somewhere that this album, in good condition, typically goes for like $90, and apparently it has been sold for up to $300. Obviously not this copy. The original owners of this copy actually liked listening to The Clash, as you can tell by the wear and tear. The Clash, Rock the Casbah, from 1982. Such a bop, and fun fact, the lyrics are inspired by that 1979 ban on Western music we were talking about in my incredibly popular video essay about religious metalheads that has so many views and people are raving about it. This is the Vancouver Complication from 1979. This is a compilation album of several Vancouver punk bands, including DOA, the Dish Rags, and the K-Tells. 1982's A Flock of Seagulls, self-titled. Yeah, this is the album with I Ran on it.